This is the way losers acting around misfits. Pound for pound, I'm the listing. You can bounce and get dismissed. Clown, get this. Couldn't walk a mile wearing my Fitbit. Competition is non-existent.
Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade, and today we're going to talk about the world famous Monster Factory. Apparently, they had a docu-series on Apple Plus that I actually sat down and watched. It's only 6 episodes, about 45 minutes apiece, and they follow various students in the Monster Factory as well as the trainer Danny Cage. The docu-series is produced by Vox Media in conjunction with the Monster Factory and Apple TV. It was released on March 17th, 2023, and it focuses on about 4 or 5 students from the Monster Factory as well as Danny Cage, and the attempt to not only make pro wrestlers, but what the goal of a wrestling school is, what the goal of the performers are, the things that they go through, general documentary style material, and it is phenomenal. It is legitimately really good. And I definitely suggest it before I even get into it that everybody watch it. I can't do it justice with an audio review of it. You need to actually sit down and watch it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to not go episode by episode, but I'm going to go through the storylines that follow through the documentary series. So basically there's a bunch of major storylines to go through this docu-series, but I'm going to basically hit some of the high notes on those as a suggestion that you go and watch it. So from episode 1, we found out that the Monster Factory is really called the PROWRESTLING Club, and it is in Paulsboro, New Jersey. Danny Cage is the head trainer, and he bought the promotion, the school from Larry Sharp, who used to run it with Bam Bam Bigelow. There's many wrestlers have come out of the Monster Factory, guys like Raven, Tatanka, Damian Priest, Matt Riddle, through different iterations. Danny Cage actually helped train guys like Matt Riddle and Damian Priest, while Larry Sharp was, of course, Raven, Tatanka, those type of guys. Plenty of guys. Bam Bam Bigelow, King Kong Bundy, just so many performers that have gone through the Monster Factory. And you see that Danny Cage from the very beginning, he is kind of positioned as being like sort of the hard-nosed coach. It's kind of cliche, but it kind of makes sense, where he's a lot like a football coach, but it's for pro wrestling. His job is to really get on the ground floor of these performers, find out what they need to do, what they need to fix in order to get signed to a bigger wrestling promotion, because that is ultimately the goal. At the end of the day, Danny Cage is a character himself. He's not just a guy on the show. You actually follow him through the show and go through some of his struggles. So when we start talking about important characters on the show, Danny Cage is very important. So Danny Cage, they tell the story that he was a indie wrestler who never really made it. He worked a full-time job for the telephone company, and he trained wrestling at night for about 4 years. Over time, of course, he started suffering many injuries, including a couple of herniated discs in his back, sciatica, and some other things. And he said that for him, wrestling was always a dream. It was just something that he wanted to do. And when he was coming up, nobody ever told him not to do any crazy shit. And that's really what he's doing in the Monster Factory, is trying to teach people how to do this while not doing the crazy shit that ended up with him having to retire early. So Danny Cage became a wrestling fan when he was 10 years old. The first match he ever watched was Sergeant Slaughter versus Iron Sheik. He was often at home alone by himself because his parents weren't always around. And he learned about the Monster Factory through Sports Illustrated, where he came across pictures of Bam Bam Bigelow and Larry Sharp. And the place was not that far from where he lived. In about 1993 or 1994, he told his father that he wanted to wrestle. And his dad said, if you can show me and prove to me that you want to do this, I'll pay for it. So a young Danny goes to the Monster Factory, busts his ass, gets accepted, and now he needs the money. So he goes home and he tells his dad, look, I got the tryout. They're willing to train me. I just need a check in order to pay for my training. Then he says his father told him, I'm not paying for that shit. I never thought you'd make it. And he says, That's why he takes people's dreams so seriously in the Monster Factory, is because he doesn't ever want to tell anybody that they can't do this. And what right does he have to tell people that they can't do it? And so he started working and ended up paying for it himself eventually. So over time, of course, he said he's working at a telephone company. He had a regular job with benefits, but it wasn't really all that fulfilling. He would wrestle on the weekends. Over time, Larry Sharpe was interested in leaving him, the company, and the two of them had a sort of father-son relationship. And he ended up selling the company to Danny Cage. Larry Sharpe did. Danny Cage had been married for 17 years. His wife was pretty upset when she heard that he was going to quit his union telephone company job in order to run the Monster Factory, because there was no regular pay. You know, this is wrestling. You only get paid when you get booked. And now you're going to be a trainer. You only get paid when students come in. So how is he going to sort of drum up business? He's found out that over time, getting people signed to wrestling promotions, of course, gets people interested in you. And so that's what he sought to do. And he said he's one of the most successful trainers in wrestling today, having gotten, I think he said 11 people in 12 years signed. So he averaged about one person per year from the Monster Factory that make it to either WWE or AEW, but he also counts Impact and Ring of Honor. Ring of Honor was a separate promotion when this thing was filmed. So he, gave himself, a lot of credit in getting guys like Damian Priest signed to WWE, a guy like Preston Vance in AEW, QT Marshall, who he said he helped train. I wouldn't exactly take credit for that, but, this is a different sort of story. This ain't my story, this is. Nick Camarado was another one that he got signed. Nick Camarado was signed to NXT before he signed to AEW. And Steve Macklin, who also worked in WWE and now works in Impact. The students basically say that Dan is much overlooked as a coach because he, quote, doesn't play the game. He was a guy who never made it, so nobody takes him seriously. He's opinionated. He's sort of narcissistic. But he takes the students very seriously. His wife talks about how he treats the students like his own children, and these students are very important to him. Now, there's a couple of angles that float through this show that involve Danny Cage. One of whom is that another one of his students, the Notorious Mimi, is about to get a WWE tryout, and he kind of has to go through that. Second is his mom has cancer, so he's kind of going through that situation as well. And the third is that he wants to promote the Monster Factory more than just being a wrestling school. So he wants to sort of do a really big show at 2300 Arena, which is the old ECW arena, to promote the Monster Factory in order to get more kids signed, because he needs more people to sign up to the school, because this was filmed, I think, after the shutdowns. So there's parts of it that was filmed before the shutdowns, and obviously there was parts of it that was filmed after the shutdowns. And so the goal is to create this really big show. I think he said it was June 30th. They didn't say what year, so I'm guessing it was 2021 or 2022. And this was, the goal was to get his remaining students seen in front of people from New Japan and WWE and AEW, etc., to get them signed. So that's the Danny Cage sort of portion of this, and he's a very good character. Especially and when it comes to challenging the students, there's some really good scenes of Danny basically just telling the students that they suck. Some of them are in person. Some of them are, he pulls them backstage or whatever, and he's really brutal to them. And I love it because it's exactly what he needs. When it comes to Notorious Mimi, he was talking about how she's about to get this WWE tryout, and he told her, like, look, the WWE, what they're looking for is personality and promo, and you're boring as fuck. And he made her do promo classes, like, again and again. He kept saying, these things are getting worse. This is awful. You're terrible. And he kept trying to get her to get better at promos, to find more of herself in these promos. And it was great to watch that, because you could tell he was taking it seriously. It wasn't a sense of entitlement there that, this is my prize student, and she was. she should be the one that was going to make it. He was saying, you need to get better. You need to always improve. There's another young man in this story. We're going to talk about him a little bit later. His name is Twitch. And Twitch is a really good promo, but he had been in the Monster Factory for a little while there, and they knew his style of promo. And Danny Cage challenged him to come up with something different because he had been doing the same thing over and over again. And so he challenged him and basically said, like, look, you've been cutting these same promos or the same style of promo for a while, you know, and he wanted Twitch to, again, the same thing he told the Notorious Mimi, get more personal, get more into your personality, into your other hobbies. Like the guy likes to sing and play the guitar and stuff like that. Figure out a way to work that into your story and into your character. And it was great watching him do that. And you would think that he was being mean, but it comes from a place of love so that they can get over it. One of my favorite scenes is when he pulls Gabby Ortiz backstage, and he's telling her that she's out of shape. And he says that at one point you were good, but you're not good now. And she just bursts into tears. And he doesn't let that weaken him. He continues by going, look, I've always been there for you. I've always told you the truth. You know, I know what's inside you. You have to work harder. You have to go back to the way you were. Things came to you too easily before. You expect these things to still come to you easily, but they don't. And to me, that sounds like every fucking coach I've ever seen or ever come across. Anybody who is in a leadership position, you have had to tell people that they suck. You have to. If you don't, then they will never know. It has to come from somebody that they trust, that they can appreciate, a father figure, somebody who will help them through it, not just say you suck and then turn it back on you, but says you suck, but here's how we can fix it. And then let you know when you improve, because they're the same ones patting you on the back. It's that fatherly role, the disciplinarian, but also the one who gives you his approval. I love Danny Cage throughout this entire thing. For me, he sells it. You know, if you don't like anything else about this show, you're going to like the Danny Cage portions of his interactions with these students. That stuff is phenomenal. And to me, it's the highlight of the broadcast. Unfortunately, Danny Cage's mother passes away after the filming of the show. He shows her his final match that she wasn't there for. He wrestled in a battle royal at the big show that he put together at the 2300 Arena. He hadn't planned on working the battle royal. He wasn't planning on working the show at all. But he figured, this is the biggest thing I've ever been a part of. I'm going to do something. So he went in there and joined the battle royal, let one of his students throw him out. And his mom was really worried about him because she knew he had all these injuries. And he promised her he wasn't going to do it again. You know, so they showed you every aspect of Danny Cage. You know, him as a father, him as a husband, him as a son, him as a coach. And of course, the coach is the part that they're going to focus on because this is about the school. But it was tremendous. It was very well done. And I loved this part of the show. Sort of the second most important person on the show was only in like an episode and a half to me. Notorious Mimi. So she is sort of the star pupil of Danny Cage in the Monster Factory. She's, I think, the women's champion of their little promotion or whatever. And we get a lot of her story before she's sent off to the World Wrestling Federation or whatever. So the interest here with Mimi is that she came into wrestling from a sort of wealthy family. So the Notorious Mimi, a.k.a. her real name is Amelia Hare. She was 19 when this was filmed. I think she's 20 now. She grew up as an adrenaline junkie. She had a very wealthy family of professionals. I think her mom was an attorney and her grandmother was a psychologist or something like that. And she learned of wrestling via YouTube. And she was inspired by a lot of the women's matches. Her mom believes, and it's an interesting thing that she says that one of the best things a parent can do is to get out of the way and sort of be supportive. Mimi rode ponies as a kid and had high expectations thrust upon her, but she wanted to go her own way. And she didn't really want to be in the same sort of industries that her mother and her rest of her parents had participated in. So she chose wrestling, and she started wrestling when she was 14. So she joined the Monster Factory when she was 14 years old. And she's been training ever since. She really kind of started having matches at like 16. So her boyfriend, whose name is Travis Jacobs, he works also at the Monster Factory. He's also one of the trainees. He's not really an important piece of the docu-series, but he's there because this is going to become important later as I kind of go off script a little bit. She got contacted by WWE on Instagram and was told that they wanted to give her a tryout. At this point, it becomes a big deal, as you know, she is going to be and could potentially become the first female signed from the Monster Factory to a major wrestling promotion. So in the second episode, the part of the Monster Factory just becomes training ground for Mimi, how to get better. This is where she's drilled on promos, and she breaks down how the tryouts are going to be set up. That it's 3 days, and 2 of those days are essentially promo and character. So day 1 is promos, day 2 is in the ring all day, and day 3 is character work, which of course is just promos. And Danny Cage talks to the people he knows in WWE is giving him positive feedback from her. She could possibly make it, and he's like, look, I can't sit around and wait for them to tell us what's going to happen with her. So he's got 40 other students to train. So while he's really excited in how to deal with the situation with Mimi, he has other people to train. One of my favorite scenes is Danny Cage and her. She's doing promos, and she's terrible. She's terrible. Like she starts a promo with I. He's like, don't start promos with I. So she has to stand there and come up with a different way to say the same thing. And then he still says, like, this promo is worse than the one before it. And she's trying her best to find some type of something. And he's telling her, like, he's outside of the ring yelling at her, like, you're here because your family's fucking loaded. You don't need to be here. You need to lean into that. And she's trying to find a way to fold that into a wrestling promo, which is her reality. You know, her mother is really rich, and she rode ponies as a child. She's literally Hunter Hearst Helmsley, but she can't put it into words. You know, she can't get that out of herself. And he's yelling at her about it, and she's trying. You know, she's doing her best. And then she finally bangs out a halfway decent promo, and she gets applause, but everybody's kind of like, I don't know if this is going to work. So she goes, and they have no footage of her tryout because WWE did not allow them to film the tryout. It comes out later that she did get the job, and so she has a big farewell, a couple of farewell scenes from her time in the Monster Factory. She'd been there for 5 years. Everybody knew it was her. She knows everybody. She's actually kind of unofficially one of the trainers. She kind of helps a lot. She's one of the most well-known students there, and she has to go take the job in Orlando. And this is kind of where we kind of go off script a little bit because they don't go into this. And this was just season 1. We don't know if there's going to be a season 2. But she did wrestle in NXT under the name Sloane Jacobs. That's why I mentioned the name Travis Jacobs, because she took her boyfriend's last name when she went to NXT. She was in NXT for a short amount of time, about 5 or 6 months before she was cut in 2022. She was part of the mass cuts at the time, and I have not seen her since. I know she did some work for AEW before she went to NXT, so it might have been a thing where WWE saw her in AEW, then contacted her through Instagram for her to come in, and then she got the job. She was there for a while. They implemented this 6-month evaluation period, and then she got cut. But she's still incredibly young. Again, she's 21 years old. But she got into the business so young. And this is one of the things I've always said about young wrestlers. And AEW has this problem in a major way. Is when you only want to be a wrestler and you've been training for wrestling since you was 14 or something like that, you don't have a personality. You don't have any other type of life experience. So what are you going to talk about in your promos? You're either going to make up shit like a rapper or something, or you're going to be boring. And she's one of those people where she just didn't have anything. She was going straight from training to WWE. She had lived no life in between. And when you look at a lot of wrestlers in the past, a lot of them worked odd jobs. They were, in the war or in some war or something like that. They were in some type of, they come from the streets, they come from the struggle or whatever. She had an almost perfect childhood. What is she going to talk about? And she hadn't had the life experience to draw from for her promos, and therefore to draw from her character work. And if she didn't want to use her lifestyle that she grew up with, which would have turned her heel and turned her into a heel character, then she got nothing to talk about. And that makes sense to me as a person who's watched wrestling his entire life. Every time I see a young wrestler, they really don't have a personality. They don't have anything to talk about. When you're young, you don't have any life experience. So getting cut, getting fired right now, at least it might have been a really good thing for her. Now she gets to go back on the indies, do some circuits, learn more about herself, learn more about the business, get some life experience, and then maybe in 2 or 3 years she can come back bigger, better, more mature than she was before, and she'll still be only like 24 or 25. Sometimes we get I know people in AEW to get really excited about Daniel Garcia, and WWE is Roxanne Perez. They get really excited about these young wrestlers, and then you just realize that they're super fucking boring. They have no personality. They have nothing to discuss. They have nothing to talk about, and it comes through on the TV that all they've ever done is work the mats, work the ring. They do all the in-ring stuff fine, but when it comes to everything else, they just don't have it. Either they're over the top and goofy, or they're so understated that they might as well just be a job guy or job girl. And that's essentially what she was in WWE, is that she was essentially a jobber. Sloane Jacobs, I don't think ever won a single match when she was on NXT. Now, under normal circumstances, there's a lot of people who went through NXT. Isla Dawn would be one of them, who was essentially a jobber before they figured out what to do with her. So she didn't get that kind of time, but now that she's been released and she can go and do other things, she could turn around and come back one day, having learned a little bit from this experience. My third favorite character through this entire show is named Gabby Ortiz, and she's almost the exact opposite of the Notorious Mimi. At the same time, though, she's a really good parallel character. So Gabby Ortiz, her story going through this show is that she's right on the cusp of quitting. Like, she's permanently, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. So Gabby Ortiz, in about 2015, she was only 20 years old, and she was also a prodigious wrestler. She similarly came out of nowhere. She's from somewhere right outside of Philadelphia. And she joined the Monster Factory. She was trained by Danny Cage. She had come up with all of these incredible characters. So she was taking the wrestling part seriously. She was incredibly slim. She was gorgeous, Hispanic. Everything came to her pretty quickly. She did tours of Japan. She did tours of the Indies. She did some stuff with Ring of Honor. She had a WWE tryout. And then depression kicked in. Apparently, before she joined the Monster Factory, Gabby's mother had died of alcoholism, and she never really dealt with it. So she spent her time wrestling, trying to kind of escaping her mother's unfortunate death. And so what you see here is now Gabby's gained in the time, and I hate to say it this way, she gained like 50 pounds. So she's like ridiculously overweight. She's chunky, especially when you see pictures of how she used to look. And for me, through the entire show, this was the elephant in the room, in terms of, you see a picture of how she used to look, and then you see a picture of how she is now, and you're like, where did all of that come from? And then you realize, okay, she suffers from some depression. She's been having difficulties dealing with her mom dying. And the first real thing that you get from her in this show is when you find out that Notorious Mimi has been signed to a WWE contract. She says, well, I wanted to be the first girl signed from the Monster Factory, and I began to question whether I even want to do it. Like, why be second? And you just kind of get that, of course, that jealousy, that negative energy, it comes right at you. And I'm like, I want to see what her problem is, like, what's her issue? And then you see what it is. She kind of breaks it down in one episode where she says, look, Mimi is 8 years younger than me. She's been training half the amount of time. I've also had tryouts at WWE. What does she have that I don't? And then later, when they started focusing on her a little bit, you see that she says, well, when I got the tryout, I was 20. I was too young. And now I'm 27. I might be too old. And she said, like, they weren't signing 20-year-old girls back when I got my, tryout. And now, of course, you see NXT. A lot of these girls are in their early 20s. And she's like, now I'm 27. And of course, when I'm significantly older than she is, I'm like 27? Like, wait a minute. And, I was scratching my head because, NXT had Taya Valkyrie in it. And Taya was 40 at the time or something like that. I'm like, I'm pretty sure it ain't because you're 27, honey. It's because you're chunky. All right? It's because you're chunky. And you don't have any passion. And that comes out later. It's the elephant in the room for several episodes. And you're thinking like, okay, is anybody ever going to tell her that that's the issue here? And eventually they do get around to it. But Gabby lives with her dad, and her dad and her have a codependent relationship, kind of as she explains it, because they bonded over her mom dying, and now all they have is each other, really. And during the showcase show, she's being paired up with Mandy Leon, who is a former wrestler from Ring of Honor. She's pretty well-known indie wrestler. And Gabby is still kind of going through this, do I want to, do I not want to, trying to deal with some of that jealousy of, Mimi being gone, having been the first girl signed, and how to deal with that. And, dealing with her mom dying, and she just doesn't have it anymore. She feels that she doesn't have it anymore. Danny Cage, talks to her and can just tell that she doesn't have it anymore. And if you, as a member of the audience, you can just look at it and tell she's out of it. She's not as dedicated as everyone else, and she's been there for a while. And Danny Cage kind of breaks it down to her, like when she was young, all this stuff came to her very fast because she put together, QT Marshall, I'll give him some credit. QT Marshall kind of broke down, what the big wrestling companies are looking for. And I actually like this. I think this was great. And this actually fits perfectly into the Gabby Ortiz portion of the show because she checks a lot of these boxes. So QT Marshall, as he interjects a little bit here, he says that these are the best ways to have success in mainstream wrestling. She says you have to look at it like a report card. And all of these things are like your classes. And he says, look, gear, promo, in-ring, social media, and backstage, attitude. If you get as many A's as you possibly can, and then that will better the likelihood of your success in the future. This is probably the best thing QT Marshall's ever done, is be a part of this and say this stuff right here. I think it's very important. And when you look at young Gabby Ortiz, she has an incredible look. Her gear was nice. She was a decent promo. Of course, she was very young in the ring, but of course she can improve there. Social media probably wasn't that big of a deal back then. And backstage, she seemed to have been a lot more upbeat. But now, here it is 7 or 8 years later, and her look has diminished. Her gear is kind of the same. Her promo is still okay. In ring, of course, she's diminished because she's out of shape. Social media is almost non-existent. And backstage, she's negative. So you're looking at it and saying to yourself, I see why nobody would sign her. She has a negative frame of mind from her depression and a lot of the other things and the jealousy and all this stuff that she's dealing with. I see why people would not sign her. But you also see that there is something there that, probably is starting to fade. And you never want to tell anybody that they're washed up at 27. Like that's insane. It's insane to tell a 27-year-old you're washed up. You peaked at 20. It's like, okay, what's the point of living at that point? But it was a very interesting piece of business to watch because, she really wanted to be the first girl to break out of the Monster Factory. And that meant a lot to her. And she wasn't going to be that. And that was like the final straw that sort of snapped. And now it all became about, can she reignite the fire within her to stay at the school. And at the end, we kind of get the issue that, get the idea rather, that she probably isn't going to. At the end of the show, we see that she's burned out. She says she wants to weigh her options to decide whether she even wants to continue on as a student at the Monster Factory or not. And you see that, and you see that she is still struggling. Not, you know, she's upset, you know, and a lot of this stuff is sort of compounding. She's still having fun in the ring, but she probably has sort of settled on being an indie wrestler, and she doesn't want to be just an indie wrestler because she's been doing that for a while. It's time to move forward in her career, and every scene with her is about that. She's not moving forward. She can't go forward, and so she's willing to give up. And it's a powerful story of being given too much too soon, and to go with, you know, what I was just talking about, when a lot of these younger wrestlers, you give them a lot of attention when they're very, very young. And then when they start getting up there in age, you know, it kind of stalls because people are now focused on the next hot young thing. And you're not the hot young thing anymore. And that's the only parallel that you can have here, because she's only 27. But considering that someone else is so much younger and already succeeding at where she's failed, she gets the idea, she gets, you know, the mindset like she's 40 or something like that. Like she can't turn her career around, she can't turn her life around. But you also see that she's very insecure, because she starts talking about how she's going to get Invisalign for her teeth, and she's going to do all of these things, she's going to get in better shape. And, you know, she's saying this stuff, but at the same time in other scenes she's talking about, you know, my body can't do what it used to, I can't hold on anymore. Again, at one point she's talking like, I'm going to turn it all around and I'm going to fix it. And then in another scene, she's like a 40-year-old hag. And it's like, no, you're not a 40-year-old hag. Like, you're a chunky, nearly 30-year-old girl with no kids. At least from what I've seen, I didn't see any kids. So you have, you know, you got to rededicate yourself. And that's basically what Danny Cage was telling her. Is like, look, you got to take this a lot more seriously than you used to. You know, it's harder now than it was before because you're not the hot young thing anymore. You gotta turn it around. So I really enjoyed the Gabby Ortiz portion of it. I thought, you know, she had a great, you know, line of stories here, and it was really important for like young wrestlers, especially young wrestlers who've had a lot, to sort of see that and see that, yeah, sometimes things do come fast, but they can go away just as fast. And also deal with your mental health issues when you can, you know, because it will catch up with you eventually. I could talk about this show for maybe another 30 minutes, but I want to highlight one more student before kind of wrapping up. It's a kid named Lucas. His ring name is Twitch. He started out as a fan in the Monster Factory, and he was all 17 or 18 years old. And then he transitioned to being a student. And he's got every mental problem you could possibly think of. He's got anxiety disorder, he's got Asperger's, he's got autism, he's got Tourette's, he's got just a myriad of mental and psychological issues. But he was a big fan of pro wrestling, and he was always a loner because, you know, he's got all of these issues. So he stopped watching wrestling. You know, he became a wrestling fan when he was a kid, but he stopped watching it because he was afraid that people would bully him for it. So he gave up something that he loved because he was afraid of the social ramifications of it. His mom also hated wrestling and wanted him to sort of be a normal kid. And since he wanted to be a normal kid, he gave up wrestling because he thought wrestling was kind of nerdy and wasn't something that could be cool. So in 2011, things start to change. You know, he decides he's going to kill himself because, you know, he's depressed, he's lonely, you know, he's a victim of bullying and all this kind of stuff. And he says that he wants to go out doing or watching something that he loves. So he turns on Monday Night Raw. And the main event is John Cena versus R-Truth. And he's got these pills, and he's going to take all of these pills and he's going to off himself. And it turns out this was the night that CM Punk did the pipe bomb promo. Now, I don't remember the date. I think it was June of 2011. So he's watching this show on the verge of killing himself. And CM Punk's pipe bomb promo saved his life because he says, he was sort of fed up with how people were treating him and how, society had been treating him. And then here's CM Punk, who is a guy who is kind of done with WWE and is speaking his mind and letting people know what he thinks. And this inspired him because now he figures that's his way out. His way out is being able to finally tell people what he thinks and how he feels. And if he could do that, then there's a reason to keep living. This was an incredible story. It sounds like a work. That's what it feels like. To me, of all the things in this documentary, this feels most like a work. I was just kind of like, oh, wait a minute. That seems a little too coincidental. But when you realize that this guy really becomes like the best at promos, you realize that maybe it's not a work, or maybe it's, a really well done work, and they show him cutting promos and he's really good at it. He cuts these sort of maniac like promos, but like all students on the show, Danny Cage has issues and he's going to challenge him on some of this stuff. And at this point, Twitch had been in the Monster Factory for about 5 or 6 years. And they're saying, look, all of his promos have become the same. He cuts sort of the same promos over and over again. And Danny Cage says that he lost his fire, that he is lacking creativity and he's lacking content on his promos. And this is something he calls him out in public for. And he kind of, it's kind of weird when you call people out in public and you're somebody like Danny Cage and you're like, hey, isn't it still like he's saying the same thing over and over again? Then some of the people who are kiss ass is going to be like, yeah, I think so too. I think you could do better than that. And that's exactly what happens, where some people think it's really good, but then Danny Cage says, well, I don't know. You feel like you cut this promo before. And then everybody was like, yeah, I guess it sounds like it, feels like it, So he's challenging him to utilize his real life, something that he really enjoys, into his promos for the big showcase. And he really got a lot of faith in Twitch as a wrestler and as a promo, but he wants to challenge him. He wants him to challenge himself. So basically, Twitch is going to have a promo before his match. He's going to wrestle Crowbar at the showcase. Crowbar from WCW, by the way. And he wants him to do a promo, but he wants the promo to involve Twitch's love of music. So then we find out that Twitch likes playing the guitar and he likes to sing. And, it's a very interesting thing we got here. And so for a large part of the series, after, we see Twitch in the ring a little bit, not much, but he's stressed out as, the days go on. How he's going to put together this promo is going to involve him saying what he wants to say in the way that he wants to say it, which pretty much means how to cut the same promos that he usually cuts, but add a little spin to it by utilizing his other skills. And we see him, just, I hate to put it this way, but he's tweaking out about under the stress of this as the days tick by. We get a couple of moments of him singing, and he's a decent singer and he plays the guitar pretty well. He's a nice sized kid too. He's pretty big. And we finally get the outcome, which is him singing Desperado as he walks to the ring for the showcase. And then he turns that into a promo. Well, it makes sense when you look at it from a storytelling perspective, because, Desperado is a guy who kind of travels from town to town, committing crimes or whatever. And that's what Crowbar kind of is. He's a guy who goes from promotion to promotion. He's an indie wrestler. Even though he's been around for a long time, he's an indie wrestler. So he basically called him Crowbar Desperado. You need to come to your senses, and says that he's going to remind everybody he's still got that fire in him, because that's the challenge that Danny Cage has given him, is that he thinks that he's lacking in intensity. He's lacking in creativity. And he nails the promo. And he has a pretty decent match. And so he kind of proves himself that he's still creative, that he still got that something. But of course, we go to a character that is, psychologically blitzed and was suicidal just, about 10 years ago, to now him being a favorite of Danny Cage at the Monster Factory. And to me, he comes across like he would be a pretty good manager. I think he's kind of bigger than most of the people. They didn't tell us how tall he was, but he seemed to be like a good 6'1" or 6'2", which might be a little tall, but then again, it could also have been the camera angle to make him look taller. But he does have decent promo skills. And with the Tourette's, that could be something that could be folded into, his character work, where, the Tourette's, even though it's real, it could be worked into stories, and especially when he gets, stressed out and worked up, it could be something that could be worked into character stuff. So it really could work, and he's just seemingly the nicest kid in the world, and it was one of the other stories that I really enjoyed following through here. Now there's, I think, 2 or 3 more characters that are on the show that we followed through. Goldie is one of them. Bobby Buffet is another one. Bobby Buffet is a classic Willie Mack junkyard dog, heavyset black dude who likes to have fun in wrestling and that kind of stuff. And Goldie is your traditional white meat, pretty boy pro wrestler. Both of them, they're interesting. They've got interesting stories, especially with Goldie, the tease of him going to New Japan, him getting extra work and actually working with Anthony Ogogo on AEW. Bobby Buffet about his weight issues and his ability to self-promote, people liking him, but is he really good? And I think we got a little interesting there with Danny Cage talking about that Bobby was, local good, but is he TV good? And I liked, that whole situation. I like both of those stories, but I don't want to go through the entire show and spoil it for everybody. I've spoiled enough. This show is definitely worth watching. Even if you just watch, I'm not saying binge the whole thing all the way through. Well, you can watch an episode a day, but I think you probably want to watch more than one, because it does get its hooks in you, and it is a really solid show. I also watched a couple interview following with Danny Cage talking about the show, and he said some stuff that I thought was very interesting. That he wanted everybody to know that wrestling is a work, and he says he wants everybody to know that wrestling is a work because he feels like wrestling's still trying to hold on to the fact that it's real. It's costing people money and opportunities. He says everybody knows that it's not real. And it says everybody knows that the Titanic sinks at the end. Nobody cares. They went to see the movie anyway. And that he wanted to do this docu-series because he wanted it to be as real as possible. And he wanted it to be refreshing. And he wanted other people to sort of pick up the torch that they're starting by doing this docu-series and sort of exposing the business a lot more. Which, the business has been exposed every which way but loose at this point. I get that sometimes you want people to continue. I straddle the fence on that whole should wrestling continue to try to maintain kayfabe or whatever. I do think it's better with kayfabe that you can get drawn into the story and that story can continue. At the same time, though, I do understand the idea of wanting to let everybody know it's just entertainment. It's not real. I do understand that too, because people do get their feelings hurt. People get upset, fans and other wrestlers. And it's pretty interesting to be able to tell people it's a work. You're dummy. You're dumb. At the same time, though, I do appreciate kayfabe a lot more. I appreciate not knowing how tall Andre the Giant is. I appreciate not knowing what certain wrestlers look like because they wear a mask. I can appreciate that aspect of it because I like the mystique of it, But this show was phenomenal. And the only thing I could think of once I got done with it is this feels to me like what AEW All Access is going to be. And it's no surprise that QT Marshall was in this show. Cody Vance, who is Preston Vance, one of the members of the Dark Order. He's also on this show, at points. And it doesn't surprise me that that now AEW is going to do an all access show, which is going to be backstage, inner workings of AEW. Yeah, we've done like Beyond the Mat and some of the other sort of exposés on wrestling. And it's not exactly breaking new ground, but for a wrestling school, it's interesting. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think anybody who likes wrestling would kind of get hooked on these human stories. Not necessarily wrestling stories, but human stories. There's very little wrestling in it. You see them trying moves out, and in some ways they're telling you how to survive a move, but it's not a lot of that. It's very digestible. So even if you're not into like a hardcore wrestling audience, it's still digestible for the average person. But you really get to know the people behind the characters that they play, or the characters that they would like to play. And you get to learn about wrestling schools and what the goal of a wrestling school is and how they do what they do. And I really like that, the Monster Factory, which is one of the most famous wrestling schools, is actually willing to do this. So I thought it was a phenomenal show, and I suggest everybody watch it. All right. Do all the YouTube things, guys. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.
Tell me what's worse than learning all that you led to believe was all horse crap.